There's something haunting about watching a man who made the entire world laugh, standing alone in his art studio at 3 in the morning, painting faces that nobody will ever see. Jim Carrey, the rubber-faced comedian who commanded $20 million per film at his peak, the man who could contort his face into 1,000 different expressions, who made us believe a man could talk out of his rear end and still win our hearts. This same man recently sat down and said something that sent chills down the spines of everyone who's ever truly paid attention. He said, "I wish people could realize all their dreams and wealth and fame, so that they could see that it's not where you're going to find your sense of completion." Now, at 61 years old, after decades of hiding behind masks both literal and figurative, Jim Carrey has finally peeled back the curtain on a truth that Hollywood has desperately tried to keep hidden. And what he's revealed isn't just about him. It's about all of us, about the very nature of existence, success, and what it means to be truly alive. Let's rewind to Newmarket, Ontario, 1962. A baby boy is born to Percy and Kathleen Carrey, a musician and a homemaker who would soon face hardships that would shape their son into something the world had never quite seen before. Young Jim wasn't born into privilege or handed a silver spoon. No, his childhood was marked by something far more valuable and far more painful: struggle. Real, tangible, soul-crushing struggle. When Jim was 12 years old, his father Percy lost his job, and the entire Carrey family found themselves living in a Volkswagen van, parked on a relative's lawn. Can you imagine that? A future megastar, sleeping in a vehicle, watching his parents' dreams crumble in real time. But here's what most people don't know about that period. This wasn't just hardship for young Jim. This was his first mask. His first performance. Every morning, Jim would wake up in that van and put on a smile. He'd go to school and become the class clown, the kid who made everyone laugh, because if he could control when people laughed, maybe he could control everything else that felt so terrifyingly out of control. At 15, he was already performing stand-up comedy at Yuck Yuck's Comedy Club in Toronto, bombing spectacularly at first, but learning something crucial with each failure: that the person on stage didn't have to be the person he was inside. The person on stage could be invincible. The person on stage could take all that pain, all that fear, all that confusion about why life had to be so hard, and transform it into something that made people feel good. It was alchemy, really. Lead into gold. Pain into laughter. Fast forward to 1994, and Jim Carrey wasn't sleeping in vans anymore. He was everywhere. Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, 3 massive hits in a single year. The rubber-faced kid from Canada had become Hollywood's hottest commodity practically overnight. Studios were throwing money at him. $20 million for the cable guy, making him one of the highest-paid actors in history at that point. But here's what was happening behind the scenes, what Jim has only recently begun to articulate with painful clarity. With each role, with each massive paycheck, with each scream of adoration from crowds of fans, something inside him was disappearing. The more Jim Carrey the superstar expanded, the more Jim Carrey the person contracted. He was becoming the mask literally and figuratively. In his own words, years later, he would describe this period as simultaneously the best and worst time of his life. "I was making millions of dollars, I could have anything I wanted, and I was the most depressed I'd ever been," he confessed in an interview that most mainstream media glossed over because it didn't fit the narrative they wanted to sell. See, Hollywood doesn't want its stars talking about the emptiness of fame. The entire machine is built on selling people the dream that if they could just be rich enough, famous enough, successful enough, they'd finally be happy. Jim Carrey was living proof that this was a lie, but nobody wanted to hear it. Not yet. He wasn't ready to tell it. Not yet. The turning point, or at least one of many turning points, came in the form of a relationship that would forever alter Jim's trajectory. In 2000, he met Jenny McCarthy, and later, he would have other significant relationships. But it was really his connection to a woman named Cathriona White that would crack something open inside him. Cathriona was an Irish makeup artist, 30 years old, struggling with her own demons, her own masks. She and Jim had an on-again, off-again relationship that was intense, passionate, and ultimately tragic. In 2015, Cathriona took her own life, and the note she left behind mentioned Jim by name. She had been battling depression, and in the aftermath, lawsuits were filed, accusations were made, and Jim Carrey found himself in a hell that no amount of money or fame could shield him from. This is when everything changed. This is when the man who had spent his entire life making people laugh finally stopped performing and started questioning. What is any of this for? What does it mean to be successful in a society that measures success by metrics that have nothing to do with actual well-being? Why do we chase fame, fortune, and validation from strangers when it all feels so hollow once you have it? Jim didn't just ask these questions. He fell into them completely. He retreated from Hollywood, moved to a quiet property, and did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He started painting. Not for movies, not for publicity, not for money. He painted because it was the only thing that felt real. His paintings weren't pretty. They were raw, visceral, sometimes disturbing portraits and abstract works that depicted faces trapped behind faces, souls screaming silently, the agony of existence rendered in oil and acrylic. Art critics didn't know what to make of it. Was this a publicity stunt? A celebrity vanity project? But anyone who actually looked at the work could see. This was pain. This was authentic. This was a man trying to understand himself by putting his internal world on canvas. And in those quiet hours in his studio, Jim Carrey began to stumble upon something that ancient philosophers have known for millennia, but that modern society has nearly forgotten. The self we think we are doesn't actually exist. Now, this is where things get really interesting, and this is what Jim has been trying to tell us for years now, though most people are too uncomfortable with the message to really hear it. Through his art, through meditation, through reading philosophy and spirituality, through ayahuasca ceremonies in the jungle and long periods of silence, Jim came to a realization that he's been shouting from the rooftops ever since. I am not Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey is something I do. Let that sink in for a moment. The character of Jim Carrey, the movie star, the comedian, the guy with the rubber face and the manic energy, is just another role. It's a mask, just like Ace Ventura or The Mask or Lloyd Christmas. The real question is, who's wearing the mask? What's underneath? This is non-dualism, Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, ancient wisdom traditions that teach the ego, the personal self, is an illusion. We're not our thoughts, not our emotions, not our achievements, not our failures. We're the awareness behind all of it, the consciousness that witnesses everything but isn't defined by any of it. For most people, this is just philosophy, abstract spiritual talk. But for Jim Carrey, this became lived experience. He describes moments where the sense of being Jim completely drops away, where there's just pure being, pure presence, and it's the most peaceful, most free he's ever felt. And then the ego comes rushing back in, with all its demands and fears and stories, and the suffering returns. In interviews, he said things that make talk show hosts visibly uncomfortable. At a Fashion Week event, a reporter asked him what he was doing there, and Jim went into this brilliant, somewhat unhinged explanation about how none of it matters, how there is no me, how we're all just clusters of molecules pretending to be separate individuals, searching for meaning in meaningless events. The reporter had no idea what to do with that. The footage went viral, but most people laughed it off as crazy Jim Carrey, not realizing he was speaking a deeper truth than anything else being said at that entire event. Here's what Jim figured out that most people never do. Achieving your dreams doesn't complete you because the you that wants completion is a fiction. It's a story you tell yourself, a character you're playing. When Jim was poor, the character's story was, once I'm rich and famous, I'll be happy. When he became rich and famous, the character's story shifted to, I need to be in love, I need to be validated, I need to make the perfect film. The goalposts kept moving because the whole game is rigged. The ego can never be satisfied because its existence depends on lack, on wanting, on the perpetual feeling that something is missing. The moment you have everything you thought you wanted, the ego invents new wants to justify its own existence. Jim started talking about this publicly, really publicly, around 2017. He did interviews where he'd say things like, I believe depression is your body saying, I don't want to be this character anymore. I don't want to hold up this avatar that you've created in the world. It's too much for me. Think about that. Depression isn't just a chemical imbalance. Though brain chemistry is certainly involved, it's an existential crisis. It's the soul rejecting the false self you've been trying to maintain. Your authentic being is suffocating under the weight of all the masks you wear, all the roles you play, all the expectations you're trying to meet. And your body-mind system starts shutting down as a form of protection, screaming at you to stop, to wake up, to remember who you really are beneath all the conditioning. This is radical stuff. This goes against everything our culture teaches us. We're taught to build ourselves up, to create strong identities, to achieve, to accumulate, to become somebody. Jim Carrey is saying the opposite. The path to peace is in realizing you're nobody. Or more accurately, you're not a fixed, separate somebody. You're the universe experiencing itself, consciousness playing all the roles. And when you really get that, when you really feel that, the suffering that comes from being a person, from having to maintain and defend and improve this person, just dissolves. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but isn't this just privileged spiritual bypassing? Easy for a rich guy to say none of it matters. And that's a fair question. But here's the thing. Jim isn't saying ambition is wrong or that you shouldn't pursue your dreams. What he's saying is don't mistake the achievement of those dreams for completion. Don't think that once you get the thing, you'll finally be okay, finally be enough. You're already okay. You're already enough. The seeking is what creates the suffering. He's also been remarkably open about his struggles with depression, about taking medication at times, about the very real chemical and psychological battles. He's not pretending spirituality is a magic cure-all. He's saying it's a framework for understanding what's happening, for not identifying so completely with the pain that you forget there's awareness watching the pain, and that awareness is untouched by it. Let's talk about his career choices in recent years, because they reflect this shift in consciousness beautifully. After his spiritual awakening, or opening, it's always ongoing, Jim became much more selective about roles. He didn't need to work for money. He'd made enough to live comfortably forever. So he started choosing projects that either deeply resonated with him or that he could use as platforms for this message. Kidding, the Showtime series where he played a children's TV host grappling with profound grief and depression was devastatingly real. It wasn't funny in the way his earlier work was funny. It was painful, dark, honest. He also essentially retired for a while, only to come back occasionally for projects that interested him. And then there's the documentary Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, which chronicles his experience playing Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon. This documentary is absolutely crucial to understanding what Jim's been trying to tell us. During the filming of Man on the Moon, Jim didn't just play Andy Kaufman, he became Andy Kaufman. Or more accurately, he let the character completely take over. For months, he refused to break character, even when cameras weren't rolling. He became Andy, complete with Andy's confrontational, boundary-pushing, reality-bending approach to performance. The documentary shows how this drove everyone on set crazy, but it also shows something profound. Jim was proving his own point about identity. If he could be Jim Carrey, if he could be Ace Ventura, if he could be Andy Kaufman, then who was he really? The character is just something that consciousness is doing. You can pick it up, wear it, put it down. The problem is when you forget you put it on in the first place and start thinking it's who you are. There's a moment in that documentary where Jim says, at some point, when you create yourself to make it, you're going to have to either let that creation go and take a chance on being loved or hated for who you really are, or you're going to have to kill who you really are and fall into your persona. This is the choice everyone faces, not just actors or celebrities. We all create personas, the successful professional, the good parent, the cool friend, whatever. And at some point we have to decide, am I going to keep performing this character, exhausting myself trying to maintain it, or am I going to risk showing the messy, imperfect, uncertain truth of who I actually am beneath it all? Jim chose the latter. And it cost him. Hollywood doesn't quite know what to do with a Jim Carrey who isn't interested in being Jim Carrey the movie star. Offers dried up in some ways. People found his new perspective weird, off-putting, too intense. But he also gained something far more valuable: integrity. Authenticity. Peace, at least at times. He's not claiming to be enlightened or to have it all figured out. He still has bad days, still struggles, still falls back into ego. But he's aware of it now. He sees the mechanism. And that seeing creates space, creates freedom. One of the most powerful things Jim has said, and this is what we all suspected but needed someone to articulate, is about fame and validation. He's talked about how when you become famous, you think you're finally going to get the love and acceptance you've been craving your whole life. Everyone will see you, really see you, and approve. Except the opposite happens. The more famous you become, the less seen you feel because people aren't seeing you. They're seeing the character, the persona, the image. They're projecting their own fantasies and needs onto you. You become a screen for other people's movies. And the real you, the actual person behind it all, becomes more isolated and invisible than ever. This is the trap of fame. This is what we all suspected, that the people who seem to have everything are often the loneliest, the most desperate for genuine connection, because they're trapped behind a wall of projection and expectation. Jim also blew the lid off the pharmaceutical industry's approach to depression in a way that was both brave and controversial. He's talked about his belief that depression medication, while sometimes necessary, is often prescribed as a way to numb people to the legitimate pain of living a life that isn't authentic. If you hate your job, if your relationships are shallow, if you're living for everyone else's expectations, of course you're depressed. Pills can't fix a life that needs changing. This doesn't mean medication is bad. It can be a crucial tool for managing brain chemistry. But Jim's point is that we've created a culture where we medicate the symptom instead of addressing the cause, which is often existential, spiritual, and social rather than purely biological. He's also been vocal about mass shootings and violence in society, tying it back to this same issue. People who have no sense of authentic self, who feel completely invisible and meaningless in a culture that equates worth with achievement and status, who are so disconnected from their own humanity and the humanity of others that violence becomes possible. Hurt people. And we live in a culture that creates a lot of hurt by selling everyone the lie that they're not enough as they are, that they need to be more, have more, achieve more. The rage and desperation that comes from perpetually falling short of impossible standards has to go somewhere. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room: Jim Carrey and the controversy that's surrounded him in recent years. After Cathriona White's death, lawsuits were filed accusing Jim of giving her STDs, of providing her with prescription drugs under a false name, of emotionally manipulating her. Jim vehemently denied these allegations, and ultimately, the lawsuits were dismissed. But the damage to his reputation was done in some circles. This is important to address because it's part of the full picture. Jim is not a saint. He's not a perfect guru. He's a flawed human being who's caused harm, who's made mistakes, who's navigated relationships poorly at times, like most of us. The difference is his mistakes played out on a public stage, and a woman died. Does that invalidate everything he's learned and is trying to share? That's for each person to decide. But here's what's true. You can acknowledge someone's wisdom while also acknowledging their shortcomings. These aren't mutually exclusive. Some of the greatest spiritual teachers in history were also deeply flawed people. The message can be valuable even if the messenger is imperfect. In fact, maybe especially if the messenger is imperfect, because it reminds us that awakening isn't about becoming perfect or transcending humanity. It's about being fully messily, authentically human while also recognizing the infinite awareness that holds it all. Jim himself has never claimed to be above reproach. He's talked openly about his relationships, about how difficult he can be, about his own selfishness and ego at times. The spiritual path isn't about becoming a better person, as he said. It's about realizing you're not a person at all, not in the fixed, separate way we think. You're a process, a verb, not a noun. You're constantly changing, flowing, evolving. The person you were 10 years ago isn't the person you are now. The person you are now isn't the person you'll be in 10 years. So which one is the real you? They all are. And none of them are. This is the paradox. Let's shift gears and talk about success, because this is really at the heart of what Jim's revealing. American culture, and increasingly global culture, is obsessed with success. Self-help gurus sell you programs on how to manifest abundance, how to optimize yourself, how to reach your full potential. And there's nothing wrong with growth or improvement. But the underlying message is always that you're not enough right now. You need to be better, richer, more productive, more enlightened. It's the ego's game repackaged as spirituality. Jim Carrey is one of the few people who achieved the absolute pinnacle of what society defines as success: fame, wealth, accolades, power, and is willing to publicly say, "I got there, and it's not what you think. It doesn't do what you think it will do." This is threatening to a lot of people because we've invested so much in the belief that happiness is just on the other side of achievement. If we can just get the promotion, find the relationship, lose the weight, buy the house, then we'll be happy. Jim's saying no, you won't. Not in any lasting way. You'll get a temporary high, and then you'll be right back where you started, looking for the next thing to chase. This is called the hedonic treadmill in psychology. We adapt to positive changes quickly and return to a baseline level of happiness. The only way off the treadmill is to stop believing the ride will take you somewhere it can't. So what's the alternative? What's Jim pointing toward? He describes it as presence, as being, as resting in the awareness that's always here, always now, untouched by whatever's happening in your life. It's not a doing, it's a non-doing. It's not an achievement, it's a recognition of what's already the case. This sounds abstract, but there are practices that point to it: Meditation, where you watch your thoughts instead of being your thoughts. Mindfulness, where you pay attention to the present moment instead of living in your head. Art, where you lose yourself in creative flow. Nature, where the conceptual mind quiets and you just experience being alive. These aren't escapes from reality, they're returns to reality, because the constant mental chatter about past and future, about problems and plans, about identity and image, that's the escape from reality. That's the dream. Presence is waking up. Jim has also been incredibly honest about the loneliness of this path. When you wake up to this stuff, when you see through the game, it becomes hard to play along with society's scripts. Small talk feels meaningless. Status games feel absurd. A lot of what people care deeply about seems trivial. This can be alienating. Your friends and family might not understand what you're talking about or why you've changed. You might lose relationships, opportunities, parts of your old life. Jim's experienced this. He's lost work, lost friends, been labeled crazy or washed up. But he's also gained something that can't be taken away. A sense of who he is beyond all the roles, all the identities, all the external validation. And he'd tell you it's worth the trade, though he'd also tell you it's not easy. There's a clip of Jim at a red carpet event where a reporter asks him, "What are you doing here?" And he responds, "I'm here to do whatever I'm going to do." The reporter looks confused and Jim continues, "There is no me. There are just things happening, and there are clusters of tetrahedrons moving around." He goes on to talk about the meaninglessness of the event, the absurdity of celebrities celebrating themselves, and he does it all with this half-smile, this knowing look that says he sees the whole thing clearly. Some people thought he was having a breakdown. Others saw it as a moment of radical clarity. He was telling the truth in a setting where everyone else was performing, and truth looks like madness in a world built on comfortable lies. What we all suspected, what Jim finally revealed, is this: the dream we're sold isn't real. Success as defined by society is not the path to fulfillment. Fame doesn't complete you. Money doesn't make you happy beyond meeting your basic needs. Validation from others doesn't fill the hole inside. These things are fine, they're not evil, but they're not the answer to the question your soul is asking. The question your soul is asking is, who am I? What is this? Why am I here? And the answer can't be found in achievement or accumulation. It can only be found in turning inward, in questioning everything you think you know, in being willing to let your entire identity die so that what's real can emerge. Jim's journey from sleeping in a van to commanding $20 million per movie to painting alone in his studio to speaking openly about the emptiness of it all. This is the hero's journey. Not the Hollywood version where the hero gets the gold and the girl and lives happily ever after. The real version, where the hero goes out into the world, achieves everything he set out to achieve, and realizes he has to leave it all behind to find what he was really looking for, which was inside him all along. Except it's not even inside him. It's what he is, it's what we all are, this consciousness that's aware of everything but isn't defined by anything. He's also talked about death, about his mortality, in a way that's both sobering and liberating. At 61, he's aware that he has more years behind him than ahead. And this awareness brings clarity. What matters? What really matters when you know your time is limited? For Jim, it's authenticity, connection, creativity, truth. It's not how many movies he makes or how much money he has or what people think of him. It's whether he's living in alignment with what's real, what's true, what's honest. He said he doesn't fear death because he knows that what he truly is can't die. The character of Jim Carrey will end, but consciousness doesn't end. Energy doesn't end. It just changes form. This might sound like spiritual bypassing or denial, but when you really understand it, it's the opposite. It's accepting death fully, which allows you to live fully. When you're not trying to avoid the inevitable, when you're not desperately clinging to a self that's going to dissolve anyway, you can relax into the present moment. You can appreciate the miracle of existence without needing it to be other than it is. You can love people without needing them to complete you. You can create without needing the creation to validate you. You're free, finally free, not because your circumstances are perfect, but because you've stopped demanding that they be. Jim Carrey's message is ultimately one of liberation, but it's a challenging kind of liberation. It requires you to question everything you've built your life on. It requires you to face the void, the uncertainty, the groundlessness of existence without the comfortable stories you tell yourself about who you are and where you're going. Most people aren't willing to do that. Most people would rather keep chasing the carrot, keep believing the lie, because the alternative is too scary. Jim's done it, though. He's walked through the fire. And on the other side, he found not the answers we want, but the peace we need. In his art, you can see this journey. The faces he paints are often distorted, fractured, multiple faces overlapping, trapped behind glass or emerging from darkness. They're representations of the human condition. The masks we wear, the selves we project, the pain of maintaining the illusion of separateness. But there's also beauty in his work, moments of light breaking through, expressions of pure emotion unfiltered by social conditioning. It's therapy, sure, but it's also teaching, a visual representation of what he's trying to communicate with words. We are all of it. Fourth, we can create. We can find ways to express what's inside us, not for validation or money or fame, but because creation is a direct connection to source, to the flow of life moving through us. Fifth, we can connect authentically with others. We can risk being vulnerable, being real, being seen for who we actually are instead of who we think we should be. Sixth, we can let go of the constant need to improve ourselves and just be ourselves. You're okay right now. You've always been okay. The search for okayness is what's creating the sense that you're not okay. And finally, we can hold it all lightly. We can play the game of life without forgetting it's a game. We can take our responsibilities seriously without taking ourselves so seriously. We can achieve and create and love and laugh while also remembering that it's all happening within consciousness, that we're the space in which it's all occurring, not just the character it's happening to. This is the balance, being fully human and fully awake, engaged with life but not imprisoned by it. Jim Carrey's revelation isn't really a revelation at all, it's a reminder. It's something the mystics and the poets and the philosophers have been saying forever. But we need to hear it again and again from different voices in different ways because we keep forgetting. We get caught up in the movie of our lives and forget we're watching a movie. We get lost in the character and forget there's an actor underneath. Jim's value isn't that he's saying something new. It's that he's saying something true, and he's saying it with the authority of someone who's lived both sides of it. He's been on top of the world and in the depths of despair, and he's telling you that neither one is who you are. You're what remains when all of it falls away. At 61, Jim Carrey is finally revealing what many of us suspected. That the emperor has no clothes, that the American dream is a beautiful lie, that you can't find yourself by becoming someone. But he's also revealing something else, something more hopeful. That underneath all the fear and striving and performing, there's a peace that passeth understanding. There's a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. There's a love that isn't conditional. It's been here all along, waiting for us to stop looking elsewhere and recognize it. And maybe that's the real gift of Jim Carrey's journey. Not that he's showing us what's wrong with the world, but that he's pointing us back to what's right, what's always been right, what we've always been but somehow forgot in the process of becoming. So when you watch his old movies now, you might see them differently. You might see a man desperately trying to prove something, to be loved, to matter. You might see the pain behind the laughter, the fear beneath the confidence. And when you watch his interviews now, you might see a man who's finally stopped trying, who's finally let himself just be, who's finally okay with not being okay. And in that, there's something deeply moving, deeply human, deeply true. Jim Carrey isn't perfect. He's not the answer. But he's asking the right questions, and he's living the answers as best he can. And in a world that's increasingly fake, increasingly performative, increasingly lost in the pursuit of empty metrics, that's revolutionary. This is what we all suspected but needed someone to say out loud. That the ladder we're climbing is leaning against the wrong wall. That the race we're running doesn't have a finish line that will satisfy us. That the person we're trying to become is keeping us from being who we already are. Jim Carrey climbed the ladder, won the race, became the person, and he's looking back down at all of us and saying, it's not up here. What you're looking for isn't up here. And if we're wise, if we're courageous, if we're ready, we'll hear him. We'll stop climbing. We'll turn around. And we'll finally come home to ourselves.